No one should get married because society expects it, because family pressurizes you, or because culture normalizes it. And you should not get married simply because it is the good and acceptable thing to do. You know why? Because our society always tells you to do this and that. Get married, have a child, and move on. But you know what? Marriage is more than that. Society or the right time is not a strong enough reason. Marriage requires conviction, it requires clarity, it requires an understanding of what you are entering into. And I'm going to say something a little different. Marriage is not meant for everyone. Welcome back to Let's Reason Together. I am your host, Vishal Abraham. Now, this is a space where we question first, think through it, and then form our beliefs. There are certain ideas in life that feel so familiar, so assumed, that we rarely stop to examine them. And today I want to talk about something everybody knows that. It's very fundamental to who we are, and it's nothing other than marriage. Marriage is one of those ideas. We grow up around it, we see it, we expect it, we talk about it. But very few of us actually stop and ask, what is marriage? Now, have you really thought about that? It's not about asking it culturally, not asking legally, not emotionally, but fundamentally, what is marriage in its true sense? Because the moment you begin to ask that question, everything starts to open up. Now, let me begin here. Marriage is not just about love. Marriage is about something else, and that is formation. It forms your character. And it does this through things that are not easy. They are covenant. They are responsibility, sacrifice, serving another person, raising a child if that's what you want, staying committed when emotions fluctuate. Now, marriage confronts you with yourself. It kind of exposes your selfishness. It tests your patience. It stretches your capacity to love. And the best part is, in doing so, it shapes you. Marriage gives structure to things that, without structure, tend to drift, like love, like sex, like partnership. Now, without structure, love can be very temporary. Sex can become detached. Partnership can become conditional. Marriage says, hey, this is not casual. This is not temporary. This is not based only on how I feel today. Marriage gives these things a form that stabilizes them. And what I want to talk about more is today, the modern view, the world sees marriage very differently. Marriage is often viewed as a human invention or a religious institution, or let's say a social construct created for order. And if that is true, then marriage is something we can redefine. We can reshape it. We can adjust it according to preference. But here's where the tension begins. Because deep down, even those who reject traditional marriage still long for what marriage promises. And what are those things? They are stability, faithfulness, security, lifelong commitment. So the question really becomes, is marriage merely invented, or is it something that we discover? Is it something meant for everyone? Should everybody get married? We'll look into that. Now let's come to the core of this episode. Suppose two people decide to live together and they stay faithful. They care for one another, they support each other, they sacrifice for each other, even raise children together and remain committed long term. In every practical sense, they are doing what a married couple does. They respect covenant, they hold each other valuable, and so on. So then, what is the difference? What is missing? Is it just a ceremony? Is it just a piece of paper? Is it social approval? Or is it the absence of a church? And this leads to a deeper question, and this is something which I have been thinking about for a long time. Does someone have to be legally married to fulfill covenantal duties? If not, then is marriage just a human construct? And if it is that necessarily a bad thing? Because I'm going to pause here, because ages ago, even before institutions like the churches and the temples and all came into being, there were human beings. And there was marriage, but marriage in a covenantal sense, there was no institutional mediation that happened. Now, I want to talk about the legal dimension today. Let's talk about what happens today when people get married. You receive a marriage certificate, and that certificate makes the union legally binding. It provides rights and protections. It defines responsibilities. Now, these are real benefits. Like you have legal clarity, you have financial security, and protection in times of conflict. But now my question is, does the law create marriage, or does it simply recognize something that already exists? Because if marriage is only legal, then before the certificate, there is no marriage. And after the certificate, suddenly there is, if it is purely legal. But is that what marriage really is? Marriage is not just legal, it is also public. It is a declaration. It says, I am choosing this person not privately, not temporarily, publicly, and permanently. And that public nature really matters because it brings a lot of different things. It brings accountability, it brings witness, it brings support. Family knows, friends know, community knows. And that really changes how you live. Because when something is public, it becomes harder to treat it casually. Now, let's be clear about something. And this is coming from my understanding. I believe I carry a certain sense of wisdom to comment on this. No one should get married because society expects it, because family pressurizes you, or because culture normalizes it. And you should not get married simply because it is the good and acceptable thing to do. You know why? Because our society always tells you to do this and that. Get married, have a child, and move on. But you know what? Marriage is more than that. Society or the right time is not a strong enough reason. Marriage requires conviction. It requires clarity. It requires an understanding of what you are entering into. And I'm going to say something a little different. Marriage is not meant for everyone. Marriage requires maturity. Now, the larger problem of divorce, the divorce rates are higher than at any time in modern history. The real reason are twofold. One is not everybody is ready to look at marriage or come to marriage in partnership and in covenant. They look at it only from a transactional perspective. Now, that's a different study altogether. And the second aspect is not everybody is meant to be married because marriage requires a lot of maturity. But society has told us otherwise. When you reach a particular age, you are pressured, especially women, are pressured into, hey, are you not going to get married or not? That's the whole idea. But marriage is not for everyone. Like I was saying, it has to come from a place of maturity. It has to come from a place of readiness to share your life because marriage requires sacrifice. It requires covenantal relationships. Covenant, we had seen in the first episode, covenant is not just about partnership. It is sacrifice. It is unconditional love. It requires you to stay and repair if something is broken. It's more than just partnership. It's not contractual. It's beyond that. And that is why I say marriage is not for everyone. And that's something which we need to understand because that would solve the issue of the large number of separation that's taking place because people are not ready to look into this particular aspect. Now, of late or many years, we have been hearing something called living together. Now, let's ask something important in that. Where did the idea of living together come from? Historically, living together without marriage was not the norm. It emerged more prominently in modern culture, especially when commitment began to be separated from structure. Now, living together often carries an implicit idea. We are together, but without binding ourselves fully. And you know what? That sounds freeing. But it also introduces something called uncertainty. Because if there is no binding, there is always an exit. And that's the fundamental problem with living together. Now, the question a lot of people ask is, like we asked earlier, if two people are living together and they are not married in the legal or in the traditional sense of it, but they are fulfilling all the responsibilities of a marriage, is it still okay? Now, we're going to answer that later. But before that, I want to look at another question. Does marriage require a church or a temple or any of those religious institutions? Does it require a man of God? Can two people marry each other on their own? Which means without the presence of an institution, can anybody become married? You know what? Because if you look at the Bible, you had the first two human beings, Adam and Eve. They were married, but at that point, they were the only two people, right? So there was nobody else to bless it or legally bind it, but it was still considered marriage. So what is the difference? At one level, Two people can make a promise. They can commit to each other, and they can decide to live as one. My question is a little more deeper than that. Is a private promise the same as a covenant? Covenants, historically, if you look at it, covenants are not private. Covenants are never undefined. Covenants are never isolated. They are always bound by or categorized by four things. It is witnessed, it is declared, it is recognized, and it's binding. So the church or religious institutions does not invent marriage, but it only recognizes, affirms, and gives it weight. And that's all that there is to it. Now, let's return to the earlier question. If a couple living together fulfills all marital duties, is that marriage? On the surface, it may appear so, but there is a fundamental difference. Living together often operates on conditional commitment. Often, not everything, often. We are together as long as this works. But marriage operates on covenantal commitment. We are together even when this is difficult. And that shift from condition to covenant changes everything. Because true covenant is not sustained by convenience. It is sustained by commitment beyond feeling. Let's push this a little further. What is wrong with the idea of polygamy, having one or more partners? Now you have new things coming up. People are not just a couple anymore. There are thruples and so on. If marriage is just a construct, why limit it? Why not redefine it? Now, this question forces us to define marriage more clearly. Because if marriage is only companionship, only agreement, and just desire, then of course there is no clear boundary. But if, and I want you to think through this, if marriage is exclusive, if it is total in that nature, if it is self-giving and sacrificing, if it is unitive, then its structure begins to make sense. So let's bring everything together. Marriage is not merely a contract. It's not a certificate. It's not a ceremony. It is a covenantal union. And attitude marks that first. How you look at it makes it more important than what others are saying about it. Marriage is public, which means there are people who are seeing this. It is binding, lifelong, unconditional. It is exclusive. It is ordered toward unity and family. It is formative in nature. The law recognizes it. And you need the law, right? You cannot be a married couple because it brings with it benefits. It brings protections with it. If a husband mistreats his wife, you have the law to protect the wife. And all these things are required. So it is absolutely important that you abide by the rules of the country that you live in. And marriage society supports it. The church or the temple or the institution blesses it. But none of these create it. It's not just about the question of whether it's an invention or not. It is part of our experience as human. They all point to something deeper. So here is a question I want to leave you with, because we do reasoning together, right? And you can think through this and would love to hear from you. If two people, if they live together, stay faithful, serve each other, raise children, remain committed, but they don't publicly declare it, they never enter into recognized covenant, bind themselves beyond condition, is that marriage? Or is something essential still missing? Not in behavior, but in the definition. Not just in function, but in the whole overall form of it. And that's something worth considering. Because sometimes what something is not just defined by what it does, by what it is declared to be. I'll repeat that, because sometimes what something is not just defined by what it does, but by what it is declared to be. And finally, if marriage is about covenant, if it is about union, if it is about the coming together of two persons in a way that includes sexual union, then we must ask, what is that union designed to be? Because, and let me break this down, marriage is not just emotional. It is not just social. It is also bodily and unitive. And that raises further questions about its nature, its boundaries, and its purpose, which we will continue to explore. Now, here is the measuring line on this topic, a vast topic. Marriage is not a small idea. It sits at the intersection of love, of commitment, of identity, family, of society. Marriage sits over here at the convergence of all of this. And how we define it will shape how we live, how society would live. And let me break this down even further. Marriage is not meant for everybody because, like I was saying, it requires a certain mindset. and it is okay to not get married. Especially coming from a traditional Christian background in that manner, it is quite hard for me to say that. But when I read at his conclusion after studies, it pointed to that the fact that not everybody should get married, because you need to have a certain mindset. You need to have a certain maturity. You need to have a certain sense of commitment, because if you choose to live with someone, in that commitment, you have to honor it. Because life is not just about fulfilling your own desires, it's also about character formation, and this is part of that. And when you are ready, get married. If you don't feel like it, and that's perfectly fine, because there are a lot of people who are successful in life who are not married, and that's perfectly fine. But if you enter into union, remember that it is covenant, and covenant brings with it responsibility, and that is binding. It is sacrificial, it is unconditional. And that's something which we have to look at, because when you understand how this basic of all human functions, or relationships, if I may put it that way, operate, then a lot of things in this world would change. We would become more responsible people. We would learn how it is to live for another person, and how love actually works. Because outside of that covenantal binding, there is no structure to how we live. And that's what I want to leave you with. Now, we will explore this in the coming episodes more. This is a starting point. Now, if you found this useful, please do share it with someone who you think would benefit from this. And until we meet again, this is your host, Vishal Abraham, always encouraging you to question, to think, and believe.